The Montana sun hung low and merciless over the Clearwater River that afternoon, turning its surface into a sheet of blinding copper. Most folks in Redemption County knew better than to cross at the bend during spring runoff, when snowmelt from the mountains turned the gentle stream into a churning beast. But Eleanor Hartwell wasn't most folks. She was a woman with nothing left to lose. The black mare had been her husband's favorite. Tom had died 6 months ago, crushed under a fallen oak while clearing their north pasture, and Eleanor had been selling off pieces of their life ever since. The mare was supposed to fetch enough money to keep the ranch through winter, maybe longer. But the buyer lived on the far side of the river, and Eleanor's grief had made her reckless. She'd urged the horse into the water despite the current's roar, despite the way the animal's eyes had rolled white with fear. They made it halfway before the river decided to claim them both. The current seized them like a giant's fist. Eleanor felt herself torn from the saddle, the reins burning through her palms as she tried desperately to hold on. Then she was under, the world a roaring brown chaos, her heavy riding skirts dragging her down like anchors. Water filled her nose, her mouth. She clawed toward what she thought was the surface, but the river spun her like a rag doll, and she couldn't tell up from down anymore. So this is how it ends, she thought with strange clarity. Tom, I'm coming. Then hands, strong, sure hands, gripped her shoulders and hauled her upward into the light. She broke the surface gasping, choking, her vision swimming. Someone was pulling her toward the shore with powerful strokes, fighting the current that still tried to claim her. She glimpsed a weathered face, intense blue eyes, a black cowboy hat somehow still miraculously on his head. Then her feet scraped bottom, and he was lifting her, carrying her up the muddy bank and laying her on solid ground. Eleanor coughed up what felt like half the river, her body shaking violently. The stranger knelt beside her, his hands steady on her back as she heaved and sputtered. "Easy now," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in honey. "You're safe. Just breathe." When she could finally focus, she looked up at her rescuer. He was perhaps 40, with lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His clothes were soaked through, water streaming from his hat, but his eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "The mare," Eleanor managed to croak. "Made it to the other side," he said. "Saw her climb out downstream. She'll be all right." He paused. "You nearly weren't." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that truth settle over her. A stranger had just risked his life to save hers, a life she'd barely been holding onto anyway. The cowboys' camp was a quarter-mile upstream, tucked into a grove of cottonwoods where the river ran gentle and forgiving. He'd carried Eleanor there when her legs wouldn't hold her, and now she sat wrapped in a rough wool blanket by his small fire, still shivering despite the flames. Her wet clothes clung to her like a second skin, cold and miserable. "Name's Cole Brennan," he said, pouring coffee from a dented pot into a tin cup. "Been tracking stray cattle up from Texas. Lost the trail about a week back, figured I'd rest here before heading home. Eleanor Hartwell." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I owe you my life." Cole shook his head. "Don't owe me anything. Just happened to be in the right place." He studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Though I got to ask, what possessed you to cross at the bend? Local woman like yourself should know better." The question, asked without judgment, broke something loose inside Eleanor. Maybe it was the near-death experience, or maybe it was simply that this stranger had pulled her from the depths and expected nothing in return. Whatever the reason, the truth came spilling out. She told him about Tom, about the empty house that echoed with memories, about the bank threatening foreclosure. She told him about selling their possessions piece by piece, watching their dream dissolve like morning frost. She told him things she hadn't even told her sister, how some morning she couldn't remember why she should get out of bed, how the silence was so loud it drowned out everything else. "I wasn't trying to die," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I wasn't trying very hard to live either." Cole was quiet for a long moment, feeding sticks into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of understanding. Lost my wife and baby daughter to fever, 7 years back. For a long time after, I was just going through the motions. Breathing but not living. He looked up at her. Took me years to learn the difference. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks, mixing with the river water still drying on her face. This stranger understood. This man she'd known for less than an hour understood the hollow place inside her better than anyone. You need to get out of those wet clothes, Cole said gently. You'll catch your death otherwise. I've got a spare shirt and blanket. I'll turn my back, give you privacy. Eleanor looked down at herself, at her ruined riding dress, at the widow's weeds she'd worn like armor for 6 months. Then she looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd shared his own grief without hesitation, who was offering simple human kindness with no strings attached. Will you stay if I undress? The words left her mouth before she'd fully thought them through. The storm warnings came on the 8th day. Thomas had lived in Dakota Territory long enough to read the signs, the strange greenish cast to the sky, the oppressive stillness, the way the cattle clustered together nervously. He'd seen storms that could flatten buildings and drive rain sideways hard enough to strip paint from wood. We need to prepare, he told Eleanor at breakfast. There's a bad one coming. She looked out the window at the deceptively calm morning. How bad? Bad enough that we could lose livestock. Maybe buildings. He paused. In extreme cases, people. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but she set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Tell me what to do. They spent the morning in furious preparation. Thomas moved the cattle to a protected valley while Eleanor secured everything that could blow away, tools, loose boards, even the laundry that had been drying on the line. She worked with focused intensity, following his instructions exactly and anticipating needs before he voiced them. We need to bring the horses into the barn, Thomas called out as the wind began to pick up. They'll panic if the storm hits with them in the corral. Eleanor was already moving toward them, speaking in low, soothing tones that somehow calmed the nervous animals. Thomas watched in amazement as she led the most skittish mare, a horse that usually trusted no one, into the barn without incident. You're good with animals, he observed. Animals are honest, Eleanor replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. The barb wasn't lost on Thomas, but there was no time to address it. The wind was strengthening by the minute, and the sky had turned an ominous dark gray shot through with sickly yellow. Get inside the house, Thomas ordered. I need to secure the barn doors. I'll help. No. The word came out harsher than he intended. Please, Eleanor. Just go inside. I can't worry about you and the ranch both. For a moment, he thought she'd argue, but she simply nodded and ran for the house. Thomas finished battening down the barn, his heart racing as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm hit like a physical blow. Thomas barely made it to the house before the full fury unleashed. Wind screamed around the building with a sound like 1,000 demons, and rain hammered down so hard he couldn't see the barn just 50 feet away. Lightning cracked across the sky in blinding sheets, and thunder followed so quickly the sound was nearly continuous. Inside, Eleanor had lit lamps and was methodically checking windows, stuffing rags around frames where wind whistled through. She'd moved furniture away from the walls and placed buckets strategically under spots where the unfinished roof might leak. Smart thinking, Thomas said, having to shout over the storm's roar. A tremendous crack split the air, and something massive crashed nearby, close enough to shake the house's foundation. Eleanor grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her face pale but composed. Was that the barn? She asked. I don't know. Could be a tree. The wind reached a fever pitch, screaming like a living thing. Thomas saw the walls actually bow inward under the pressure, and for the first time, genuine fear gripped him. He'd built this house himself, but what if it wasn't strong enough? Eleanor appeared at his side, pressing a cup of water into his hands. The house will hold, she said with certainty. You built it well. I can see the quality of the workmanship." Her faith in him, unexpected and complete, steadied his nerves more than any whiskey could have. "Stay away from the windows," he told her. "If the glass breaks." The words were cut off by an explosion of sound as the kitchen window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. Bringing Allah inside was like introducing fire to water, a clash of elements that shouldn't coexist. She entered the house in a crouch, moving along the walls, touching everything with wonder and wariness. The wood stove made her freeze, some deep instinct recognizing danger. The mirror above the sink drew her like a magnet. She stared at her reflection for 10 full minutes, making sounds of confusion, reaching out to touch the glass, unable to understand the image looking back. Marcus moved slowly, deliberately, narrating everything he did. "This is light," he said, flicking a lamp on and off. "This makes food warm," he explained, showing her the stove. She absorbed it all with hungry intensity, her pale eyes darting everywhere, her body coiled with the tension of something ready to bolt. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Allah would come to the house each day, usually around noon, and spend hours inside. The wolves waited on the porch or in the yard, never more than a howl away. Marcus taught her slowly, carefully, words, gestures, the basic architecture of human life she'd never known. She learned with shocking speed. Within a month, she could speak in simple sentences, though her voice remained rough, and used to forming human sounds. Marcus give food. Allah go outside. Wolves wait. But the teaching flowed both ways. Allah showed Marcus things about the forest he'd never imagined. She could read tracks like other people read books, understanding the stories written in the snow, what animal, how long ago, where it was going, whether it was healthy or injured. She knew which plants were safe to eat and which would kill. She understood the invisible boundaries of territory, the complex social structures of the wolf pack, the rhythm of the wilderness that beat beneath everything. "Pack is family," she told him one evening, struggling with the words. "Pack is everything. Protect. Hunt. Love." She paused, frustration crossing her face as she searched for language. "Wolves teach Allah, mother wolf feed. Brothers wolves protect. Allah is wolf. But you're also human," Marcus said gently. Her eyes met his, filled with something he couldn't quite read. Human. What is human? It was an impossible question. How do you explain humanity to someone raised without it? As winter deepened, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't keep Allah's existence secret forever, but he also couldn't expose her to a world that would see her as a freak, a subject for study, a medical miracle to be dissected and analyzed. He contacted a friend from his old life, Sarah Chen, a developmental psychologist he'd known in college. He explained the situation carefully, making her promise absolute discretion. When she arrived at the ranch 2 weeks later, the shock on her face was almost comical. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, watching through the window as Allah sat in the snow with her pack, engaged in what looked like a serious conversation with the alpha wolf. "I know," Marcus said. Sarah spent 3 weeks at the ranch, documenting everything, running gentle assessments, building trust with Allah. Her findings were extraordinary. Despite being raised by wolves from infancy, Allah's brain had retained its human plasticity. She was learning language at a rate that shouldn't be possible, her neural pathways adapting and rewiring with each passing day. "She's rewriting the textbooks," Sarah said one night over coffee. "Everything we thought we knew about critical periods, about language acquisition, about what makes us human, she's proving it wrong." But Sarah also saw the cost. Allah didn't fit anywhere. She was too human for the wild now. Marcus's teaching had awakened something in her that couldn't be put back to sleep. But she was also too wild for civilization, her instincts and perceptions shaped by 18 years of living as a wolf. "What happens to her?" Sarah asked. "You can't keep her isolated here forever." "But if the world finds out?" "I know," Marcus said again. The answer came from Allah herself. One evening in early spring, as the snow began to melt and the first green shoots pushed through the earth, Alla sat with Marcus on the porch. She'd been quiet all day, and her pack had been restless, howling more than usual. "Marcus," she said, her speech clearer now, though still carrying that rough edge. I need tell you something." "What is it?" She gestured to the forest, to her wolves, to the wild spaces. "This is home. Always home. I am wolf. Pack is family." Then she gestured to the house, to Marcus, to the human world he'd shown her. "But this is, also something. Something important. I want learn. Want understand. Both worlds." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "You want to stay?" "Yes. And no." She struggled with the complexity. Want stay sometimes. Want wild sometimes. Need both. Is possible. And so they built something new, something that had never existed before. Alla lived between worlds, spending days in the forest with her pack, hunting and running and being wolf, then returning to the ranch to learn to read, to write, to understand the species she'd been born into. Marcus became her bridge, her translator between worlds. He protected her privacy, allowed her to grow at her own pace, never trying to force her to choose between her two natures. Sarah returned several times, documenting Alla's progress, her research careful and ethical, always putting Alla's well-being first. They published papers eventually, keeping Alla's identity protected, presenting her case in ways that helped science understand human potential without turning her into a spectacle. Years passed. Alla learned to navigate both worlds with grace that shouldn't be possible. She could discuss philosophy with Marcus one day and bring down an elk with her pack the next. She was wholly unique, not quite human, not quite wolf, but something entirely her own. On a summer evening 5 years after Marcus had first moved to the ranch, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Thank you," Alla said, her English nearly perfect now, though she still preferred her mixed language, part human speech, part wolf communication. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For not trying to make me choose. For understanding that I am both. Many people would want to fix me. Make me only human. Or leave me only wolf. You don't need fixing," Marcus said. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be." She smiled, a real smile now, fully human, though her eyes still held that wild light. "We are all both," she said. "All humans. You have wild inside too. You just forgot. The world makes you forget." Marcus looked at her, this impossible girl, this bridge between worlds, and realized she was right. Somewhere in the march of civilization, humans had forgotten they were animals too, had forgotten the wisdom of the wild, the connection to the earth, the simplicity of belonging. Alla had never forgotten because she'd never learned to forget. As darkness fell, her pack emerged from the trees and she rose to join them. "Tomorrow," she said. "I come back tomorrow. We read more." "We'll read more," Marcus confirmed. She dropped to all fours, moving with her wolves into the forest, and Marcus watched her go, this girl who proved that humanity wasn't just one thing, that wildness and civilization weren't opposites but could exist in harmony, that the boundaries we drew around ourselves were just illusions. The wilderness had given her to him, and he had given her the tools to be truly free. In the end, that was enough.